What if there was a safe space for you to explore artificial intelligence? What if there was a team of friendly professionals waiting to help you examine what you can do with AI in your courses? Welcome to the world of what if.
Good morning, everyone. As Chad mentioned, my name is Lisa McDonald. I am an instructional design assistant here at COSI, and I don't always wear this hat, but I hope that by the end of today's presentation, you will understand why. I have decided to title my presentation From Exposition to Resolution because it occurred to me that there might be some overlap between the art of storytelling and the science of learning. And when it comes to AI, when I started here at COSI, I used to think that AI was only for cheating. It was like Googling the answers, and there really wasn't any viable reason for using it in higher education. However, my opinion, my perspective has shifted, and now I think that AI presents opportunities for deep and meaningful learning, and I hope that I can show you today why. You may notice on this slide, I have titled it, try that one more time, metacognitive reflection. This is one framework that we can use. Maybe some of you even have used it in your classrooms, in your courses before. A way to frame how your thinking has changed from the beginning to the end of the course. I used to think, and now I think. So this presentation will follow a little bit of a journey from exposition to inciting incident to rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. And hopefully I can illustrate to you why, but let me begin by saying in the exposition that it occurred to me that exposition is kind of like constellations and metaphors. I think that all learning is a metaphor. Because if we think about what Piaget said about assimilation and accommodation, when we learn new information, we have to accommodate it in our worldview before we can assimilate it into how we see the world going forward. But what about constellations? Well, when this presentation began, I knew I had an assignment to do a Playground Friday, but I wasn't really sure what I had to say about AI at the Center for Online and Continuing Education at Florida Atlantic University. My thoughts looked a little bit like this board of Post-it notes, all kinds of thoughts, but I didn't know that there was necessarily a shape to it. It actually was a constellation. And if we think back to what a constellation, excuse me, I apologize. If we think back to what a constellation actually is, it's really just a random collection of stars. It doesn't have any inherent meaning. But over centuries, humans have looked up at the night sky and seen shapes that they can either correlate to something they can already recognize in the world, or something that illustrates a story that they already have in their worldview. So constellations are inextricably tied with our mythologies and stories. In fact, think about being at a campfire at night and you can see the stars in the darkness. And one of the most impressive things about an evening campfire is being able to sit around with loved ones and tell stories, because it is, after all, about finding points of connection. So what was the inciting incident then, and what does that have to do with this presentation? I was thinking about my experience, my previous experience as an English teacher and drama teacher in high school. I used to teach my students about the plot curve, which I now know is called Freytag's pyramid. You may have seen something like it before. It looks a little bit like this. At the beginning of a story, we have the exposition. The exposition tells us who the characters are, when and where they exist in time and space. It could be imaginary, it could be historical, it could be future. But the beginning, the exposition of the story really explains to us who is involved and what we need to know, the context we need to know about them before we can understand the story. And then some incident occurs, some moment gets the ball rolling, as we say. Some inciting incident starts things. And what does it start? It starts what we refer to at least in high school English classes, as the rising action. What is it that's rising? In some ways, you might say it's the conflict at the heart of the story. It is what the characters have to do and how they are going to do it. And many, many, many times it's portrayed as rising because the challenges, the difficulties get increasingly more challenging. They rise as the story continues until some climactic moment where that everything comes to a head. It's the protagonist versus the antagonist. It's the boss battle. It's the peak of the action, if you will. And then once the battle is over, the dust begins to settle. And short term, I think of as the falling action, but the long-term resolution is really where we understand the why of the story. Sometimes we even refer to it as the theme or the moral of the story. So that is Freytag's pyramid and what it has to do with storytelling. I often wondered when I taught this graph to my students, is it actually a graph? And if we think of reading from left to right, or if we think of the x-axis on a graph, x often represents time. It's the change over time. Well, what is it that's changing? And if we look at rising action, and if we look at climax, and that the climax is a pivot point for the story, then my argument is that it's tension, conflict, struggle that is the y-axis. And what makes storytelling so powerful is that as the characters in the story are experiencing the stress and the tension of the increasing difficulties, the audience is relating, hopefully, somehow with that tension and stress. And the higher the tension gets, the more engaged they are in the story. That the audience themselves, we have something to win or lose along with the characters in the story. So, as I just mentioned, rising action. Something that we use often here at COSI is Bloom's taxonomy of verbs. You may have seen it illustrated as a pyramid, kind of like this. It begins with foundational skills of being able to remember or recognize and recall facts. And then as our skills strengthen, we can understand what those facts mean. Once we understand what they mean, we can apply those facts, rules, concepts, ideas in our study. Then we can analyze, we can break down those pieces of information into their component parts. Once we've analyzed, then we can evaluate the individual parts or ideas. And then, as some of you have maybe heard me say before, everything is a remix. Once we have remembered, understood, applied, analyzed, and evaluated, we can remix things to create a whole new thing that hasn't existed before. But this made me wonder, does that mean that create is the climax? If I'm using this analogy of Freytag's pyramid and Bloom's taxonomy, does that mean that the climax is the create phase? And I think not, because I think what we need to be able to do at the climax of the story is all of them. So there's an alternate way of expressing Bloom's taxonomy. Instead of as a hierarchy, I have seen it represented as a circle. Unfortunately, I didn't have the artistic skills to draw you a circle, so mine looks a little bit more like an X-Wing fighter, if you're familiar with Star Wars. But imagine that as a circular pie with 6 equal pieces. Maybe if you've ever played Trivial Pursuit, you're familiar with the shape of the game piece and the pieces of pie that get placed into as you go through Trivial Pursuit. In any case, if we are looking at this climactic moment now, what I'm arguing is that students learners, all of us actually, are experiencing all 6 different facets of the word understanding. And this comes from Wiggins and McTighe's backward understanding by design, which is a backward design methodology. And the crux of it is that the word understanding has different connotations: self-knowledge, empathy, perspective, interpretation, explanation, and application. When we say I understand, it can have so many different connotations or meanings. What does it really mean to say that I understand? Do I understand this concept? Do I understand it on one level, or do I understand it on all levels? So coming back to my plot curve then, I think of it a little bit like a roller coaster. After the exposition, after the inciting incident, we've climbed Bloom's taxonomy. We get to the climactic moment where we must be able to pick any and or all of those facets of understanding. I think of it as a roller coaster with a loop-de-loop. You've got to be able to cycle through all of them in order to get to the full resolution of your learning. Falling action. For me, I always thought of falling action as the immediate short-term results of the climax, and the denouement is the longer-term resolution of the story. Falling action is where the dust begins to settle. The actual impact of that boss battle is going to be felt. And I thought instantly of this quote that I've seen attributed to Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that made me think about learners and their experience, their emotional experience of learning new information. Learning is an emotional experience. How we feel about what we are learning impacts how well we absorb it. I think that that's true from my own experience as a learner. I think that that's true from my experience as a teacher. And I think that it is true from my experience, my beginning, nascent experience as an instructional designer. And so now I like to tip my hat to my sidekick on today's journey in honor of Halloween, the resolution. And resolution of this story, I'm going to refer back to the Super Mario effect. And it comes from a TED Talk that I will share with you in just a moment. But at the end of this TED Talk, the speaker, Mark Rober, shows this meme, which you may have seen because it has circulated widely across the internet, that our plans are almost always smooth. Things in our minds are always smoother than they are in the reality. For instance, on the top panel, the bicyclist is at point A, he can see the finish line, and it is a straight shot right there, no difficulties, this is going to be easy. But then you see in the bottom panel, the reality. The bicyclist is now much smaller, and the path is now much more complicated. Challenges, obstacles, weather, other difficulties that have to be superseded before the character actually arrives at their destination. And one of the professors that I really have appreciated the opportunity to get to know shared with me once, I was very frustrated because I was not learning something. I'm not doing this the best way. And he shared with me the idea that learning is inherently inefficient, that those moments of struggle and challenge are what solidifies our learning in our experience. It is the accommodation of new information that allows us to assimilate a new worldview. So some influential ideas that I've experienced along this way. The first video there on the left, you'll have access to this presentation. You can watch on your own time Mark Rober's Super Mario effect. Definitely influenced my attire for today, but also has been really helpful in understanding taking failure as part of learning, being able to take your bumps and bruises and get back up and try again. And then the other video that's there is Sir Ken Robinson. He talks about changing education paradigms. This also was another video that I really enjoyed. And I'm just going to click through them real quickly because they will both start playing. Okay. So now this brings me to, what does all of that have to do with AI? And I borrowed this slide from a course that I'm taking right now at the University of North Florida certification in AI for work and life. And Dr. Jeff Kroom argues that those bullet points on the left side of the slide are the things that AI is really good at. And it occurred to me looking at this slide, I superimposed IQ and EQ because it occurred to me, excuse me, that the skills of AI align very much with, pardon me, I'm so sorry about that. AI technologies are really good at what we call IQ, analysis, know-how, technological expertise, concept and design, critical thinking, patterns, and logic. But that AI only functions with a human in the loop. And what humans have is EQ, emotional intelligence. We have, our gifts are empathy, motivation, self-reflection, managing relationships, social awareness, and self-control. So AI by itself is neither good nor bad. It's useless. It's just a tool. It's when we add humans into the loop that we can get it to have positive impact and positive meaning. In developing this presentation, I worked with 3 different generative AI platforms. I used primarily ChatGPT for the initial brainstorming and also to help me put the citations at the end of the presentation. I used Gemini once I had sort of the pieces, the dots that I wanted to connect the stars in my constellation. I asked Gemini to critique the argument to see if it held any water or if I was just kind of shouting into the wind. So Gemini also has a text speech feature. I believe it's called Gemini Live. And I have a pretty lengthy commute to Boca in the morning and back home in the afternoon. And so I have used on several of my commutes Gemini Live to sort of thought partner and toss around ideas. So that was one of the tools that I used in generating this presentation. And then I also used Copilot. Both Gemini and Copilot are encouraged by Florida Atlantic University. Using those tools, you are protected as long as you are logged into your FAU account. I used Copilot to organize the ideas and help me iterate the things into the order that would make it make sense. And I also used Copilot to sort of error check once I was done. So I thought that I would leave you with a couple of sample prompts that you could, if you wanted to, copy and paste or modify to your choosing if you decided that you wanted to try it out with generative AI. So the shortest one is you would literally type these words to ChatGPT. You, ChatGPT, are an educator or designer creating a presentation or a course or a module that connects the art of storytelling with the science of learning. And you're going to ask it to help me organize this topic using story structure, beginning, middle, and end, and where the conflict reflects the learner's challenge and the resolution shows the learner's transformation. Encouraging the generative AI tool to integrate ideas from learning theory, emotion, and reflection, and then encourage me, the user, the typist, to frame my own shift in understanding through the metacognitive reflection I showed you at the beginning. I used to think, and now I think. Another possible prompt you could use, I actually went into Gemini and I said, okay, given the entire length of conversation that you and I have had about this presentation as I'm planning it, how could I have originally prompted you to get the information out of you that I did? And I happened to plug into it a framework that I really like, the CRAFT framework, which gives the generative AI tool the context, the role, the audience, the format, and the task or topic that you want it to do. So this, if you wanted to, on your own time, read, this is what Gemini says. If you had given me this, I might have been able to give you back something very similar to what we ultimately developed together. And then finally, I thought, what if I used one of these generative AI tools to explain back to me what was the ground that we covered? What was the path that we took? So I asked Copilot to give me a summary of our entire conversation. I won't read the whole thing to you, but I will read the beginning. Copilot said, we began with a compelling hunch that storytelling structures like Freytag's pyramid and the hero's journey might illuminate and enrich learning design. Together, we explored how these narrative frameworks could align with educational models such as Bloom's taxonomy, Maslow's hierarchy, and Wiggins and McTee's 6 facets of understanding. And then it explains the different steps that it saw that we took. Throughout, we prioritized critical reflection, acknowledging where the metaphor might break down, and emphasized experimentation over prescription. The goal, to invite faculty and staff to reimagine learning as a journey and AI as a companion in the process. And that, for me, is really what ties it all together, that this AI tool is a companion, a thought partner for us to work with. So to recap, the ground that we have covered today includes constellations, Freytag's pyramid, Bloom's taxonomy, facets of understanding, Maya Angelou, and the Super Mario effect. So I just want to say thank you so much for your time and attention today. If you have further questions, please feel free to email us at playground@fau.edu. If you have missed any of our Playground sessions, or you just want to rewatch one of your favorites, you can find all of our past events on the Playground playlist on our YouTube channel.